In this episode of Voice of the Sea, we're learning about oral histories, what they do for communities, and what's happening at the Center for Oral History at UH Mānoa. We talk with professors, students, and community members about what oral histories have taught them and how oral histories benefit communities and individuals across Hawaii. Like here at Waialeʻe on the north shore of Oʻahu, where oral histories are informing the revitalization of this rich community resource. We start off talking with Professor Emerita and founding member of the Ethnic Studies Department, Daviana McGregor, and her daughter, Associate Professor of Oceanography, Rosiano Lani Allegado, about their family connections to Waialeʻe. But first, we hear from Ethnic Studies Professor and North Shore Field School Lead Instructor, Tai Kavika Tengan. So we're at Waialeʻe, but I haven't been in this building before. What space are we in here?
Right, so this is called the sheep shed, and sheep used to be here when this was a UH experimental livestock station. For our purposes, we held an oral history field school here out in Waialeʻe in fall 2023. And this was the site that we would hold class in. We would break out our little folding tables and chairs, and this was a training course on oral history methodologies, both for graduate students and undergraduates. Along with myself were other faculty or staff from the Center for Oral History. The students, after doing the training, would then go and do the interviews. We would break up the class of 20 into 5 groups, each with their own alaka'i, and sometimes 2 alaka'i. And we really, as a field in oral history, focus on the agency of the person telling the story, that they're narrating it, that we're there to help them in that process. It's essentially this effort to tell the story of Hawaii's people from their first person kind of recollections. Really great stories give a sense not only of that history and the different phases of history, but also the ways in which families and communities really thrived, even in those very different kinds of moments of time, and much of it based in a deep relationship to place, the ability of their families to be self-sufficient and on this land and also on the ocean. So many of them had stories of fishing, of diving for squid, of big family parties, and really when they all came back, regardless of what time in their lives they were here, you could really see their eyes light up, and oftentimes move to tears, as it was such a formative moment. And this is really important too, because the North Shore Community Land Trust really has this vision of restoring the abundance of this place, which is not only in terms of agriculture and food, but also of culture, of relationships, of families. We got a glimpse of what that looked like when this was a place that was supporting families in different moments in time.
How important is it to you to get your students out here? I mean, it sounds like in some respects they're doing classroom kinds of things. They have tables and chairs, but they're here.
Yeah, I think it's just essential if we're looking at the aina, the land, as this true source of feeding. That's what the term means, the place that feeds. You don't really get a sense of how that works unless you're out on the aina. And the aina is more than just kind of the soil and dirt and things that grow from it. It's the environment, it's the people, it's all these other elements and histories that kind of make a community real. And so you need to be out in that community to experience it. Aina is also defined in terms of feeding people, and there's in Hawaiian a distinction between land that has no people and land that has people, and the one that has people is aina. And if students are really going to get an education in Hawaii that is going to pay serious attention to indigenous ways of knowing and being, you need to actually be out on the land, in the community. There's just a very different way that history lives in these spaces. The Center for Oral History's archive has over 800 interviews that have been conducted since the 1970s. A lot of the early focus of our center were on the stories of the plantation workers and immigrants, as well as Native Hawaiians. Though those early years, there's a lot more of the plantation stories represented. Those are also some really important Native Hawaiian and other stories from the multi-ethnic peoples of Hawaii. The goal was to tell all the stories of Hawaii's people, especially those that hadn't been recorded or weren't being taught in the textbooks, and oral history was the way to have those voices come through.
What are the benefits to the community from this type of oral history work?
Well, the community just has a deeper understanding and appreciation of its own past, of the struggles of those who came before them. But it also helps to imagine a future based in those relationships, those connections to place that are important for guiding these future visions of who we want to be, and to maintain what is important and unique about Hawaii as things transform so rapidly as they are.
You would periodically come out here as you're growing up?
Yeah, well, I think it was definitely a gathering place for my family growing up. When my grandparents retired, they decided to spend a lot more time out here, and so I was raised out here with my grandparents. Growing up, I would look out the back window of my grandparents' house, and we would be here summertime and wintertime, and it would rain, and we would always feel so sad because the cows were like standing in water, and I would always be thinking, like, why would they put cows here? It's so wet. And to have that connection be made that it was actually a wetland. And of course, there's so many spaces in Hawaii that have been developed and were wetlands, and were tried to be engineered to be something else, that it made a lot of sense. And I'm so interested in seeing how it's going to return to being what it originally was.
What is your academic discipline?
I feel like I do a lot of things. I'm trained as a microbiologist. The questions that I pursue have a lot to do with understanding the microbiomes of indigenous seascapes, and really understanding how indigenous resource management facilitates high biodiversity, microbially as well as macrobially. What's so valuable about oral history is that they provide a baseline of what the land was like, what the landscape was like, and there is a huge amount of really valuable information, some might even say data, that you can use to establish baselines, so that as bioculture restoration progresses, we can see what it is we're trying to be shooting for, what are our targets. So knowing, for instance, this land is capable of producing 800 pounds of kalo a week. Well, what does that mean about the soil? What does that mean about the functional microbes that were there to help that process along? All of those things can help us to get back to those baselines, or at least get near those baselines.
And so how important is it in this development or rehabilitation of Waialeʻe to have not only the oral histories, but also the connection to the university and the other disciplines that are coming together to do active learning out here?
The university has these aspirations to become a Hawaiian place of learning, to really have the opportunity to bring students here and to have them connect through Aina is one of the most real and authentic ways to create that kind of ethos in a very genuine way. Well, you hear about it in terms of kids going on field trips, but once you get to higher education, we don't have as much of that enfolded into our curriculum. The opportunity to see how we could recreate that here. Create a space, maybe not recreate it, not the same thing, but have it be its own place-based educational models.
What is special about this place for you?
Well, when I was in grade school, my dad acquired land out along the shoreline here at Waialeʻe, right on the ocean front. We began to come out here on weekends and spend the weekend or our holidays here at Waialeʻe and enjoy the ocean front. But at the time, there was also the University of Hawaii farm, and so there was also the cattle and the sheep and the pigs and everything. There were only about maybe 5 other families, and maybe just 3 of the families were here all the time. The others were also like us, would come on weekends. I think the families here fished a lot, definitely relied on fishing for a large part of their food I would expect, but they weren't growing anything that I recall. It was mostly just the ocean was very healthy. People would get, they would go with the squid boxes and, look for squid and lobster. There was limu kohu out on the edge of the reef. There was lots of kala fish. It was very kind of distinctive for this area to have the kala fish. When we had abundance, you had not as efficient ways to go and harvest. Traditionally, our ancestors built fishing koa on the land that marked their fishing grounds, but now you have, these more efficient GPS locators. So all of that has impact. When our fishermen, traditionally our ancestors would go out fishing, they would, and they found a feeding ground, which was called a koa, because the koa is the coral, and whereas there's coral, there's limu, that's the feeding ground where the fish will congregate naturally in the ocean. And so when they find these natural feeding grounds in the ocean, they would construct fishing shrines on the land. There were markers that had an upright stone and the coral, and they could be visible from the ocean. When they built them, they would be able to triangulate to relocate their fishing grounds in the ocean. The fishermen would always be very conscious about the seasonal changes in the limu. Then that would then provide a seasonal change in the type of fish that would be more dominant. The main thing is that you're observing those changes constantly, so then you can adjust your fishing practice, your harvest practice, so that you don't over-harvest and you can harvest sustainably. And so those kind of practices are important to document when we begin to try to restore the abundance and to have marine life come back and flourish. How do we do that? What are the conditions when they were flourishing? What changed that, and how do we begin to try to restore these areas that have been impacted by development? These oral histories give us an appreciation of the cultural practices and ethics with regard to land and resources that allowed our community historically to be independent of imported foods, to exercise food sovereignty. If we want to envision how the land could be best utilized to be most productive, then it's good to inform ourselves about what was observed, about the changes in the land. How was the land used in traditional times? How did our ancestors utilize the land? And of course, people that we're interviewing at this point don't remember, beyond 1900s, but research, shows the landscape was mostly being cultivated in kalo because it was a wetland. How do we protect the land and protect the resources that not only support us and feed us, but it also provides the natural beauty that makes Hawaii so special, and that is why we live here and why we want to continue to live here and have our future generations experience it in the way that we have, or even to experience it better the way our ancestors had experienced it. That way of life supported an abundance of food production, and both in the land and in the ocean. So understanding that is like, how do we get back to using our resources to sustain our residents and our local economies? Only 55% of the people who live here were born and raised here. So about 45% of the people who are living in Hawaii didn't grow up here and don't have family histories that connect them to Hawaii either. And so there's sort of a divide. And so how do we bridge the appreciation for our history so that we can protect and continue the legacies of our Native Hawaiian people, but also understand and appreciate the contributions made by the different immigrant peoples? Anybody in the world can go on to Scholarspace, Center for Our History, and hear the history of, plantations in Hawaii or stores in Kona and community transitions in Kalihi and Kaka'ako and what Waikiki Beach used to look like. This is as much an heirloom and part of our heritage as the collections in the museum.
The University of Hawaii's Sea Grant College program focused on Hawaii's coasts and its communities through sustainable development, safe seafood supply, sustainable coastal tourism, hazard resilience, and healthy coastal ecosystems. Hawaii's Sea Grant.
You're watching Voice of the Sea. We're at the Center for Oral History at UH Mānoa, talking about the center's work cataloging Hawaii's past with Associate Director Maika Mizukami.
At the Center for Oral History, we collect and document the memories of the people of primarily Hawaii, but also broader Oceania. Back in the 70s, when the Ethnic Studies program was also getting started, there wasn't a lot of curriculum or resources on the history of the peoples in Hawaii. So what a lot of the faculty and instructors in the program were doing were going out to the community and doing oral histories to record and document that history from the viewpoint of the people who lived it. That's why it's so important for us to do that work today, to get that really working class, everyday people perspective on life here in Hawaii. The really cool thing about oral histories is that a lot of the stories that are shared resonate even decades later. So even though these are more contemporary oral histories, they have an ability to speak to so many people so broadly. So trying to find some of those stories that speak to the senses and maybe speak to the emotions as well. Our narrators really get vulnerable sometimes and share a lot that they've gone through, and hearing about their resilience and how they're able to get to where they are today is so inspiring. Unlike a lot of other oral history centers, we're recording these interviews to be transcribed and then placed in an archive as this historical document that other people can use. We're not going through and analyzing it and writing books on it. We're providing the primary resource for community members or other researchers to go through and write those books or make those podcasts or produce those documentaries. Some people have been inspired by our collections to do walking tours. One example is in Kaka'ako, there was a woman who got funding to go through our Kaka'ako collection and hire actors to act out some of the stories in the oral histories where they actually occurred, and projecting historical images on the walls in Kaka'ako just so that people could get a feel for what it was like back in the day. Other people have written plays based on our oral history collections. So really it's a resource for our community members. When we get requests for oral history projects, we can't take on all of them just because we are so limited in terms of staffing and budget, but we do have a revised How to Do Oral History booklet that we just completed this year. It's a PDF document that basically tells you how to do an oral history project from start to finish.
If people are interested in accessing the oral histories, where would you advise them to go?
So they can go to our website, oralhistory.hawaii.edu. We upload all of our transcripts to make them available. And there's a couple projects now that you can access both the transcript and the audio recording. And you can search for certain keywords, or you can filter by date or location.
We are looking for a few heroes, mentors, trailblazers, innovators, a passion to change lives, spark curiosity, open hearts, and awaken minds, help students answer the question, who am I? This could be your calling, but this is no job. It's the journey of a lifetime. Be a hero. Be a teacher.
You're watching Voice of the Sea. We're profiling the work of the Center for Oral History and talking to undergraduate student Christina Fideli and doctoral student Danny Ka'ohe David about their experiences documenting oral histories. What was it like to actually work with the kupuna out at Waialeʻe and do a real formal kind of interview about their personal story?
Very emotional, very emotional. It's like the most impactful thing I've done here at UH, because The whole class was really centered around feeling, and being in the field school, we got to be in tune with like our bodies and being in a place, and you know, there's the rains that came through Waialeʻe and the winds, and it was just like getting to, you know, take note of all these different things. It was physical and emotional and a lot of different sensations. So we crave that type of connection with community at all ages, especially as young people. I think this whole process was really indicative of how powerful coming together to work on a project is. It's really changed my perspective of the way I navigate the world around me and can understand different social forces that play a part in making the world the way we see it.
What skill sets are valuable in being a ethnic studies academic person?
Open-mindedness is really crucial. Maybe letting your guard down to understand that there are multiple ways of thinking about things, multiple ways of experiencing things, I think is of importance. Ethnic studies to me is really an opportunity to uplift these hidden stories.
It's empowering and it's uplifting for the next generation to get involved with oral history. You learn so much about the place that you're in, where you come from, and the people that are around you. There's so much history around us. We just need to like look at it. Stop and just learn and look at it and listen. I love oral history. I feel like I'm talking to one of my elders and they're just telling me about all this great, rich history that you just never learn in school. With oral history and anthropology, I feel like you're looking at culture from a different lens. Personal lens, where you can see stories from people in the community and things you can't read in a textbook. People should get excited because it's so personal. It's privileged knowledge, it's familial knowledge. When I talk with my grandma about like where we come from and who were our ancestors, she tells me like personal stories about her grandparents, her mom, her siblings, her aunts. And that to me is an oral history interview because you're having this moment of connection on like a very deep and personal level.
Home in Waialeʻe, where the cows and the sheep play all day.
Yeah.
The wind was ever present. It just kept blowing, you know, and it didn't stop, you know. So if I ventured a little bit into the water with my clothes on, it didn't matter because as soon as I came out, all I had to do was just walk around a little and the wind would dry me. You know, that's what I remember.
Learning about Waialeʻe, and I'm not from Waialeʻe, it motivates me to be involved in my community because I was so inspired by these people that I met, these narrators. It just made me want to get to know my community more on that personal level.
Explore the work of the UH Mānoa Center for Oral History and help bridge the gap between the past and the future for Hawaii. Learn more on our website at voiceofthesea.org. Follow us on social media at Voice of the Sea TV. Mahalo for watching Voice of the Sea. Exploring Our Fluid Earth is the dynamic curriculum developed by the University of Hawaii's Curriculum Research and Development Group. The award-winning Fluid Earth and Living Ocean textbooks are now interactive and online. New activities, updated content, and a teacher community. Exploring Our Fluid Earth is now freely available. Find out more at exploringourfluidearth.org.